All right, we are coming up on 8 o'clock. So, let's get comfy, settle in, grab a drink, and get back to our book. Welcome back. This is our fourth night reading from H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds. Not to be confused with any of the myriad adaptations. No, we're not seeing Tom Cruise running. No, we're not seeing Ice Cube do Ice Cube things. No, we're not having a knockoff of Independence Day. Nope. This is the original, The War of the Worlds. And we've seen quite a lot happen so far already. The first book came to its end. Product placement. That would make sense. That would make sense. So we've seen the first book come to a close. The fall of London, the rather complete dominance of the Martians as they make their landings and establish their positions and put the armed forces to shame. Remember, this is around the turn of the 19th century armed forces, so it's not exactly what we might consider a modern force. This is the same sort of armies that fought Napoleon. Not tanks, not trench warfare, not any of the sort. This is old-fashioned line up, have gun emplacements, put some cannons in the bushes, and hope for the best. So the fact that they've had any success at all is pretty impressive, honestly. The Ironclad did decently well before it was also summarily destroyed, but it took a couple with it, so that's nice. Huzzah, huzzah. Unfortunately, now that means that the Martians know what the Ironclad is and know how to respond to it. We've come into the second book now, where our narrator, who I think is still nameless, has found himself trapped in the ground level basement, cellar, kitchen, pantry area of a house that was just barely on the edge of the landing site of the most recent arrival of one of the Martian cylinders. So, trapped in the rubble, watching things play out, getting a better understanding and first-person view of the Martians and their works than anyone on Earth has had to date. And the despair is starting to set in. They are thoroughly outclassed. So, we'll have to see whether there could be a spark of hope, whether things will rise up, or if things will continue to get worse. I'm sure many of us are familiar with the overall story, but it's always fun to suspend disbelief just a little bit and see how things play out in the moment. So, with all that preamble out of the way, let's go ahead and dive back in to The War of the Worlds, Book 2, Chapter 3, The Days of Imprisonment. The arrival of a second fighting machine drove us from our peephole into the scullery, for we feared that from his elevation the Martian might see down upon us behind our barrier. At a later date, we began to feel less in danger of their eyes, for to an eye in the dazzle of the sunlight outside our refuge must have been blank blackness. But at first, the slightest suggestion of approach drove us into the scullery in heart-throbbing retreat. Yet, terrible as was the danger we incurred, the attraction of peeping was, for both of us, irresistible, I know, my men. And I recall now with the sort of wonder that, in spite of the infinite danger in which we were between starvation and a still more terrible death, we could yet struggle bitterly for that horrible privilege of sight. We would race across the kitchen in a grotesque way between eagerness and the dread of making a noise, and strike each other and thrust and kick within a few inches of exposure. The fact is that we had an absolutely incompatible dispositions and habits of thought and action, and our danger and isolation only accentuated the incompatibility. at Halliford, I had already come to hate the curate's trick of helpless exclamation, his stupid rigidity of mind, his endless muttering monologue vitiated every effort I made to think out a line of action, and drove me, at times, thus pent up and intensified, almost to the verge of craziness. He was as lacking in restraint as a silly woman. Okay, calm down, narrator man. He would weep for hours together, and I verily believe that to the very end this spoiled child of life thought his weak tears in some way efficacious. I would sit in the darkness, unable to turn my mind off him by reason of his importunities. He ate more than I did, and it was in vain I pointed out that our only chance of life was to stop in the house until the Martians had done with their pit. That in that long patience a time might presently come when we should need food. He ate and drank impulsively, in heavy meals at long intervals. He slept little. As the days wore on, his utter carelessness of any consideration so intensified our distress and danger that I had, much as I loathed doing it, to resort to threats, and at last to blows. That brought him to reason for a time, but he was one of those weak creatures void of pride, timorous, anemic, hateful souls full of shifty cunning, who face neither God nor man, who face not even themselves. Alright, I feel like the narrator has had... Alright, I feel like Wells has had some very bad roommates, and so he's putting out his frustrations on the page here. I feel for him. It is disagreeable for me to recall and write these things, but I set them down that my story may lack nothing. Those who have escaped the dark and terrible aspects of life will find my brutality, my flash of rage in our final tragedy easy enough to blame, for they know what is wrong as well as any, but not what is possible to tortured men. But those who have been under the shadow, who have gone down at last to elemental things, will have a wider charity. And while within we fought out our dark, dim contest of whispers, snatched food and drink, and gripping hands and blows, without, in the pitiless sunlight of that terrible June, was the strange wonder, the unfamiliar routine of the Martians in the pit. Let me return to those first new experiences of mine. After a long time, I ventured back to the peephole to find that the newcomers had been reinforced by the occupants of no fewer than 3 of the fighting machines. These last had brought with them certain fresh appliances that stood in an orderly manner about the cylinder. The second handling machine was now completed, and was busied in serving one of the novel contrivances the big machine had brought. This was a body resembling a milk can in its general form, above which oscillated a pear-shaped receptacle, and from which a stream of white powder flowed into a circular basin below. The oscillatory motion was imparted to this by one tentacle of the handling machine. With 2 spatulate hands, the handling machine was digging out and flinging masses of clay into the pear-shaped receptacle above. Ooh, I did not turn the mic off in time for that. Sorry. The pear-shaped receptacle above, while another arm, it periodically opened a door and removed rusty and blackened clinkers from the middle part of the machine. Another steely tentacle directed the powder from the basin along a ribbed channel towards some receiver that was hidden from me by the mound of bluish dust. From this unseen receiver, a little thread of green smoke rose vertically into the quiet air. As I looked, the handling machine, with a faint and musical clinking, extended telescopic fashion, a tentacle that had been a moment before a mere blunt projection, until its end was hidden behind the mound of clay. In another second, it had lifted a bar of white aluminium into sight, untarnished as yet, and shining dazzlingly, and deposited in a growing stack of bars that stood at the side of the pit. Between sunset and starlight, this dexterous machine must have made more than 100 such bars out of the crude clay, and the mound of bluish dust rose steadily until it topped the side of the pit. The contrast between the swift and the complex movements of these contrivances and the inert, panting clumsiness of their masters was acute, and for days I had to tell myself repeatedly that these latter were indeed the living of the two things. The curate had possession of the slit when the first men were brought to the pit. I was sitting below, huddled up, listening with all my ears. He made a sudden movement backward, and I, fearful that we were observed, crouched in a spasm of terror. He came sliding down the rubbish and crept beside me in the darkness, inarticulate, gesticulating, and for a moment I shared his panic. His gesture suggested a resignation of the slit, and after a while, my curiosity gave me courage, and I rose up, stepped across him, and clambered up to it. At first, I could see no reason for his frantic behavior. The twilight had now come, the stars were little and faint, but the pit was illuminated by the flickering green fire that came from the aluminium making. The whole picture was a flickering scheme of green gleams and shifting, rusty black shadows, strangely trying to the eyes. Over and through it all went the bats, heeding it not at all. The sprawling Martians were no longer to be seen. The mound of blue-green powder had risen to cover them from sight, and a fighting machine, with its legs contracted, crumpled, and abbreviated, stood across the corner of the pit. And then, amid the clangor of the machinery, came a drifting suspicion of human voices that I entertained at first only to dismiss. I crouched, watching this fighting machine closely, satisfying myself now for the first time that the hood did indeed contain a Martian. As the green flames lifted, I could see the oily gleam of his integument and the brightness of his eyes, and suddenly I heard a yell, and saw a long tentacle reaching over the shoulder of the machine to the little cage that hunched upon its back. Then something struggling violently, was lifted high against the sky, a black, vague enigma against the starlight. And as this black object came down again, I saw by the green brightness that it was a man. For an instant he was clearly visible. He was a stout, ruddy, middle-aged man, well-dressed. 3 days before, he must have been walking the world, a man of considerable consequence. I would see his staring eyes and gleams of light on his studs and watch chain. He vanished behind the mound, and for a moment there was silence. And then began a shrieking and a sustained and cheerful hooting from the Martians. I slid down the rubbish, struggled to my feet, clapped my hands over my ears, and bolted into the scullery. The curate, who had been crouching silently with his arms over his head, looked up as I passed, cried out quite loudly at my desertion of him, and came running after me. That night, as we lurked in the scullery, balanced between our horror and the terrible fascination this peeping had, although I felt an urgent need of action, I tried in vain to conceive some plan of escape. But afterwards, during the second day, I was able to consider our position with great clearness. The curate, I found, was quite incapable of discussion. This new and culminating atrocity had robbed him of all vestiges of reason or forethought. Practically, he had already sunk to the level of an animal. But, as the saying goes, I gripped myself with both hands. It grew upon my mind, once I could face the facts, that terrible as our position was, there was as yet no justification for absolute despair. Our chief chance lay in the possibility of the Martians making the pit nothing more than a temporary encampment, or even if they kept it permanently, they might not consider it necessary to guard it, and a chance of escape might be afforded us. I also weighed very carefully the possibility of our digging a way out, in a direction away from the pit. but the chances of our emerging within sight of some sentinel fighting machine seemed at first too great, and I should have had to do all the digging myself. The curate would certainly have failed me. It was on the third day, if my memory serves me right, that I saw the lad killed. It was the only occasion on which I actually saw the Martians feed. After that experience, I avoided the hole in the wall for the better part of a day. I went into the scullery, removed the door, and spent some hours digging with my hatchet as silently as possible. But then, when I had made a hole about a couple of feet deep, the loose earth collapsed noisily, and I did not dare continue. I lost heart, and lay down on the scullery floor for a long time, having no spirit even to move. And after that, I abandoned altogether the idea of escaping by excavation. It says much for the impression the Martians had made upon me, that at first I entertained little or no hope of our escape being brought about by their overthrow through any human effort. But on the fourth or fifth night, I heard a sound like heavy guns. It was very late in the night, and the moon was shining brightly. The Martians had taken away the excavating machine, and, save for a fighting machine that stood in the remoter bank of the pit, and a handling machine that was buried out of my sight in a corner of the pit immediately beneath my peephole, the place was deserted by them, except for the pale glow from the handling machine, and the bars and patches of white moonlight. The pit was in darkness, and, except for the clinking of the handling machine, quite still. That night was a beautiful serenity, save for one planet. The moon seemed to have the sky to herself. I heard a dog howling, and that familiar sound it was that made me listen. Then I heard quite distinctly a booming sound, like the sound of great guns. 6 distinct reports I counted, and after a long interval, 6 again. And that was all. That brings us to the end of Chapter 3. So yeah, the curate, definitely one of the worst roommates you could think of in a crisis situation like this. And the Martians, for the life of me, I don't think any of the adaptations have touched on what use the Martians made of their captive Earthlings. There's been those that are like, sometimes they're brought in and you think they're being used as slaves. Other times they're brought up as just, chattel or whatever. But the whole process of the Martians feeding through transfusions of blood from other living creatures, I don't think I remember that coming up aside from our readings the past couple nights. It's pretty grisly, and an interesting imaginative twist on what sort of value an invader might place on the locals. It's also another bit of direct criticism, I think. Wells is not too much of a believer in the colonial experience, and directly sucking the blood of the locals is kind of a damning stance on the colonial take. It's not terribly subtle, but yeah, but it does get the point across. And that's, as we all know, all fiction is grounded in the experiences of the author. It may not be direct one-to-one, but Wells's thoughts and ideas carry through in the prose, and the ideas, and the execution thereof. So we can sort of get a feel for his character. He's a little bit, through the narrator, which, not necessarily a self-insert, but through the narrator it seems he's, proud, a little bit conservative, but also of a mind that, independence of person and such. And he does not like the idea of the strong trampling over the weak. You are so right. People will always miss the damn point. Doesn't matter whether it's laid out for them, or explained, or disseminated, or put directly in flashing letters in front of them. No, that's not what he meant. No, it's... No. The next thing you'll know, they're going to be praising the Martians as an example to be held up for. I don't have a whole lot of faith in humanity either. All right, let's continue. We've had our little bit of a yap session in between chapters, and since we're planning on finishing this on Tuesday, we can take our time like this. So we're not really in a rush, but I do want to get back to the reading. This is interesting. All right, so chapter 4, and I will withhold this chapter title for reasons. It was on the 6th day of our imprisonment that I peeped for the last time, and presently found myself alone. Instead of keeping close to me and trying to oust me from the slit, the curate had gone back into the scullery. I was struck by a sudden thought. I went back quickly and quietly into the scullery. In the darkness, I heard the curate drinking. I snatched in the darkness, and my fingers caught a bottle of Burgundy. For a few minutes there was a tussle. The bottle struck the floor and broke, and I desisted and rose. We stood, panting and threatening each other. In the end, I planted myself between him and the food. I told him of my determination to begin a discipline. I divided the food in the pantry into rations to last us 10 days. I would not let him eat any more that day. In the afternoon, he made a feeble effort to get at the food. I had been dozing, but in an instant I was awake. All day and night, we sat face to face, I wary but resolute, and he weeping, complaining of his immediate hunger. It was, I know, a night and a day, but to me it seems now, an interminable length of time. And so, our widened incompatibility ended at last in open conflict. For 2 vast days we struggled in undertones and wrestling contests. There were times when I beat and kicked him madly, times when I cajoled and persuaded him, and once I tried to bribe him with the last bottle of Burgundy, for there was a rainwater pump from which I could get water. But neither force nor kindness availed. He was indeed beyond reason. He would neither desist from his attacks on the food, nor from his noisy babbling to himself. The rudimentary precautions to keep our imprisonment endurable he would not observe. Slowly, I began to realize the complete overthrow of his intelligence, to perceive that my sole companion in this close and sickly darkness was a man insane. From certain vague memories, I am inclined to think my own mind wandered at times. I had strange and hideous dreams whenever I slept. It seems paradoxical, but I am inclined to think that the weakness and insanity of the curate warned me, braced me, and kept me a sane man. On the 8th day, he began to talk aloud instead of whispering, and nothing I could do would moderate his speech. "It is just, O God," he would say over and over again, "it is just. On me and mine be the punishment laid. We have sinned. We have fallen short. There's poverty, sorrow. The poor were trodden in the dust. And I held my peace. I preached acceptable folly. My God, what folly! When I should have stood up, though I died for it, and called upon them to repent. Repent! Oppressors of the poor and needy, the winepress of God! Then he would suddenly revert to the matter of the food I withheld from him, praying, begging, weeping, at last threatening. He began to raise his voice. I prayed him not to. He perceived a hold on me. He threatened. He would shout and bring the Martians upon us. For a time, that scared me. But any concession would have shortened our chance of escape beyond estimating. I defied him, although I felt no assurance that he might not do this thing. But that day, at any rate, he did not. He talked with his voice rising slowly through the greater part of the 8th and 9th days, threats, entreaties mingled with a torrent of half-sane and always frothy repentance for his vacant sham of God's service, such as made me pity him. Then he slept a while, and began again with renewed strength, so loudly that I must needs make him desist. "Be still," I implored. He rose to his knees, for he had been sitting in the darkness near the copper. "I have been still too long," he said, in a tone that must have reached the pit, "and now I must bear my witness. Woe unto this unfaithful city! Woe, 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 woe! To the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpet." "Shut up!" I said, rising to my feet, and in a terror lest the Martian should hear us. "For God's sake, nay!" shouted the curate at the top of his voice, standing likewise and extending his arm. "Speak! The word of the Lord is upon me!" In 3 strides he was at the door leading into the kitchen. "I must bear my witness. I go. It has already been too long delayed." I put out my hand and felt the meat chopper hanging to the wall. In a flash I was after him. I was fierce with fear. Before he was halfway across the kitchen, I had overtaken him. With one last touch of humanity, I turned the blade back and struck him with the butt. He went headlong forward and lay stretched on the ground. I stumbled over him and stood panting. He lay still. Suddenly, I heard a noise without. The run and smash of slipping plaster, and the triangular aperture in the wall was darkened. I looked up and saw the lower surface of a handling machine coming slowly across the hole. One of its gripping limbs curled amid the debris. Another limb appeared, feeling its way over the fallen beams. I stood, petrified, staring. Then I saw, through a sort of glass plate near the edge of the body, the face, as we may call it, and the large, dark eyes of a Martian, peering. And then a long, metallic snake tentacle came feeling slowly through the hole. I turned by an effort, stumbled over the curate, and stopped at the scullery door. The tentacle was now some way, 2 yards or more, in the room, and twisting and turning with queer, sudden movements this way and that. For a while, I stood fascinated by that slow, fitful advance. Then, with a faint, hoarse cry, I forced myself across the scullery. I trembled violently. I could scarcely stand upright. I opened the door of the coal cellar and stood there in the darkness, staring at the faintly lit doorway into the kitchen, and listening. Had the Martian seen me? What was it doing now? Something was moving to and fro there, very quietly. Every now and then, it tapped against the wall, or started on its movements with a faint metallic ringing, like the movements of keys on a split ring. Then a heavy body, I knew too well what, was dragged across the floor of the kitchen towards the opening. Irresistibly attracted, I crept to the door and peeped into the kitchen. In the triangle of bright outer sunlight, I saw the Martian, in its Briareus of a handling machine, scrutinizing the curate's head. I thought at once it would infer my presence from the mark of the blow I had given him. I crept back to the coal cellar, shut the door, and began to cover myself up as much as I could, and as noiselessly as possible, in the darkness, among the firewood and coal therein. Every now and then I paused, rigid, to hear if the Martian had thrust its tentacles through the opening again. Then the faint metallic jingle returned. I traced it slowly, feeling over the kitchen. Presently I heard it nearer, in the scullery, as I judged. I thought that its length might be insufficient to reach me. I prayed copiously. It passed, scraping faintly across the cellar door, An age of almost intolerable suspense intervened. Then I heard it fumbling at the latch. It had found the door! The Martians understood doors. It worried at the catch for a minute, perhaps, and then the door opened. In the darkness, I could just see the thing, like an elephant's trunk more than anything else, waving towards me and touching and examining the wall, coals, wood, and ceiling. It was like a black worm swaying its blind head to and fro. Once even, it touched the heel of my boot. I was on the verge of screaming. I bit my hand. For a time, the tentacle was silent. I could have fancied it had been withdrawn. Presently, with an abrupt click, it gripped something. It seemed to go out of the cellar again. For a minute, I was not sure. Apparently, it had taken a lump of coal to examine. I seized the opportunity of slightly shifting my position, which had become cramped, and then listened. I whispered passionate prayers for safety. Then I heard the slow, deliberate sound creeping towards me again. Slowly, it drew near, scratching against the walls and tapping the furniture. While I was still doubtful, it rapped smartly against the cellar door and closed it. I heard it go into the pantry, and the biscuit tins rattled and a bottle smashed, and then came a heavy bump against the cellar door. Then, silence that passed into an infinity of suspense. Had it gone? At last, I decided that it had. It came into the scullery no more. But I lay all the 10th day in the close darkness, buried among coals and firewood, not daring even to crawl out for the drink for which I craved. It was the 11th day before I ventured so far from my security. And that brings us to the end of Chapter 4, The Death of the Curate. Well, that was a right bit of suspense right there. The curate rising further and further and falling into madness, and the final conclusion there of the conflict between the narrator and the curate. See, I'm starting to catch on when they need to be withheld. It's very dependent on the author, but this one was just like, yep, that one can wait. All right. Let's keep this pace going with Chapter 5, The Stillness. My first act, before I went into the pantry, was to fasten the door between the kitchen and the scullery. But the pantry was empty. Every scrap of food had gone. Apparently, the Martian had taken it all on the previous day. At that discovery, I despaired for the first time. I took no food, or no drink either, on the 11th or the 12th day. At first, my mouth and throat were parched, and my strength ebbed sensibly. I sat about in the darkness of the scullery, in a state of despondent wretchedness. My mind ran on eating. I thought I had become deaf, for the noises of movement I had been accustomed to hear from the pit had ceased absolutely. I did not feel strong enough to crawl noiselessly to the peephole, or I would have gone there. On the 12th day, my throat was so painful that, taking the chance of alarming the Martians, I attacked the creaking rainwater pump that stood by the sink, and got a couple glassfuls of blackened and tainted rainwater. I was greatly refreshed by this, and emboldened by the fact that no inquiring tentacle followed the noise of my pumping. During these days, in a rambling, inconclusive way, I thought much of the curate, and of the manner of his death. On the 13th day, I drank some more water, and dozed and thought disjointedly of eating and of vague, impossible plans of escape. Whenever I dozed, I dreamt of horrible phantasms, of the death of the curate, or of sumptuous dinners. But asleep or awake, I felt a keen pain that urged me to drink again and again. The light that came into the scullery was no longer gray, but red. To my disordered imagination, it seemed the color of blood. On the 14th day, I went into the kitchen. And I was surprised to find that the fronds of the red weed had grown right across the hole in the wall, turning the half-light of the place into a crimson-colored obscurity. It was early on the 15th day that I heard a curious, familiar sequence of sounds in the kitchen, and listening, identified it as the snuffing and scratching of a dog. Going into the kitchen, I saw a dog's nose peering in through a break among the ruddy fronds. This greatly surprised me. At the scent of me, he barked shortly. I thought, if I could induce him to come into the place quietly, I should be able, perhaps, to kill and eat him. And in any case, it would be advisable to kill him, lest his actions attracted the attention of the Martians. Hard times and hard choices, huh? I crept forward, saying, "Good dog," very slowly. But he suddenly withdrew his head and disappeared. I listened. I was not deaf, but certainly the pit was still. I heard a sound like the flutter of a bird's wings and a horse croaking, but that was all. For a long while I lay close to the peephole, but not daring to move aside the red plants that obscured it. Once or twice I heard a faint pitter-patter, like the feet of the dog going hither and thither on the sand far below me, and there were more bird-like sounds, but that was all. At length, encouraged by the silence, I looked out. Except in the corner, where a multitude of crows hopped and fought over the skeletons of the dead the Martians had consumed, there was not a living thing in the pit. I stared about me, scarcely believing my eyes. All the machinery had gone, save for the big mound of grayish-blue powder in one corner, certain bars of aluminium in another, the black birds and the skeletons of the killed. The place was merely an empty circular pit in the sand. Slowly I thrust myself out through the red weed and stood upon the mound of rubble. I could see in any direction save behind me to the north, and neither Martians nor sign of Martians were to be seen. The pit dropped sheerly from my feet. But a little way along, the rubbish afforded a practicable slope to the summit of the ruins. My chance of escape had come. I began to tremble. I hesitated for some time, and then, in a gust of desperate resolution, and with a heart that throbbed violently, I scrambled to the top of the mound, in which I had been buried so long. I looked about again. To the northward, too, no Martian was visible. When I had last seen this part of Sheen in the daylight, it had been a straggling street of comfortable white and red houses, interspersed with abundant shady trees. Now, I stood on a mound of smashed brickwork, clay, and gravel, over which spread a multitude of red cactus-shaped plants, knee-high, without a solitary terrestrial growth to dispute their footing. The trees near me were dead and brown, but further, a network of red threads scaled the still-living stems. The neighboring houses had all been wrecked, but none had been burned. Their walls stood, sometimes to the second story, with smashed windows and shattered doors. The red weed grew tumultuously in their roofless rooms. Below me was the great pit, with the crows struggling for its refuse. A number of other birds hopped about among the ruins. Far away, I saw a gaunt cat slink crouchingly along a wall, but traces of men there were none. The day seemed, by contrast with my recent confinement, dazzlingly bright. The sky a glowing blue A gentle breeze kept the red weed that covered every scrap of unoccupied ground gently swaying. And oh, the sweetness of the air. That brings us to the end of chapter 5. Stillness. Very short chapters here for the second book. There's a lot of tension and a lot of action, but not a whole lot of text. So we're making very quick work of these chapters. And we're about just shy of 3/4 of the way through the book now. So we're making a solid pacing. All right. So it seems the Martians have left. The narrator is free to take in the brief, or the breath of the outside air, and hopefully find something to eat. Gladly, he didn't have to kill the dog, which, we take our wins where we get them. And the Martians don't give a damn about what's left over after their meal times, so they've left that for the crows. And, what would a post-apocalyptic scene be like without crows feasting on a pile of corpses? It's just gotta set the scene, right? It's part of the landscape. Otherwise, it's just empty. What else are you gonna put in the corner? All right, let's continue now with chapter 6, The Work of 15 Days. For some time, I stood tottering on the mound, regardless of my safety. Within that noisome den from which I had emerged, I had thought, with a narrow intensity, only of our immediate security. I had not realized what had been happening to the world, had not anticipated this startling vision of unfamiliar things. I had expected to see sheen and ruins. I found about me the landscape, weird and lurid, of another planet. For that moment, I touched an emotion beyond the common range of men, yet one that the poor brutes we dominate know only too well. I felt as a rabbit might feel, returning to his burrow and suddenly confronted by the work of a dozen busy navvies digging the foundations of a house. I felt the first inkling of a thing that presently grew quite clear in my mind, that oppressed me for many days. A sense of dethronement. The persuasion that I was no longer a master, but an animal, among the animals, under the Martian heel. With us, it would be as with them, to lurk and watch, to run and hide. The fear and empire of man had passed away. But so soon as this strangeness had been realized, it passed, and my dominant motive became the hunger of my long and dismal fast. In the direction away from the pit, I saw, beyond a red-covered wall, a patch of garden ground, unburied. This gave me a hint. I went knee-deep, and sometimes neck-deep in the red weed. The density of the weed gave me a reassuring sense of hiding. The wall was some 6 feet high, and when I attempted to clamber it, I found I could not lift my feet to the crest. So I went along by the side of it, and came to a corner in a rockwork that enabled me to get to the top, and tumble into the garden I coveted. Here I found some young onions, a couple of gladiolus bulbs, and a quantity of immature carrots, all of which I secured, and scrambling over a ruined wall, went on my way through a scarlet and crimson trees toward Q. It was like walking through an avenue of gigantic blood drops. Possessed with 2 ideas, to get more food, and to limp, as soon and as far as my strength permitted, out of this accursed, unearthly region of the pit. Some way farther, in a grassy place, was a group of mushrooms which I also devoured, and then I came upon a brown sheet of flowing, shallow water, where meadows used to be. These fragments of nourishment served only to whet my hunger. At first I was surprised at this flood in a hot, dry summer, but afterwards I discovered that it was caused by the tropical exuberance of the red weed. Directly this extraordinary growth encountered water, it straightway became gigantic and of unparalleled fecundity. Its seeds were simply poured down into the waters of the Wey and Thames, and its swiftly growing and titanic waterfronts speedily choked both those rivers. At Putney, I afterwards saw the bridge was almost lost in a tangle of this weed. And at Richmond, too, the Thames water poured in a broad and shallow stream across the meadows of Hampton and Twickenham. As the water spread, the weed followed them, until the ruined villas of the Thames Valley were, for a time, lost in this red swamp, whose margin I explored, and much of the desolation the Martians had caused was concealed. In the end, the red weed succumbed almost as quickly as it spread, a cankering disease due, it is believed, to the action of certain bacteria presently seized upon it. Now, by the action of natural selection, all terrestrial plants have acquired a resisting power against bacterial diseases. They never succumb without a severe struggle. But the red weed rotted like a thing already dead. The fronds became bleached, and then shriveled and brittle. They broke off at the least touch, and the waters that had stimulated their early growth carried their last vestiges out to sea. My first act on coming to this water was, of course, to slake my thirst. I drank a great deal of it, and, moved by an impulse, gnawed some fronds of red weed, but they were watery, and had a sickly, metallic taste. I found the water was sufficiently shallow for me to wade securely, although the red weed impeded my feet a little. But the flood evidently got deeper towards the river, and I turned back to Mortlake. I managed to make out the road by means of occasional ruins of its villas, and fences and lamps, and so, presently, I got out of this spate, and made my way to the hill going up towards Roehampton, and came out on Putney Common. Here, the scenery changed from the strange and unfamiliar to the wreckage of the familiar. Patches of ground exhibited the devastation of a cyclone, and in a few score yards, I would come upon perfectly undisturbed spaces, houses with their blinds trimly drawn and doors closed, as if they had been left for a day by the owners, or as if their inhabitants slept within. The red weed was less abundant. The tall trees along the lane were free from the red creeper. I hunted for food among the trees, finding nothing, and I also raided a couple of silent houses, but they had already been broken into and ransacked. I rested for the remainder of the daylight in a shrubbery, being, in my enfeebled condition, too fatigued to push on. All this time, I saw no human beings, and no signs of the Martians. I encountered a couple of hungry-looking dogs, but both hurried circuitously away from the advances I made them. Near Roehampton, I had seen 2 human skeletons, not bodies, but skeletons picked clean, and in the wood by me I found the crushed and scattered bones of several cats and rabbits and the skull of a sheep. But though I gnawed parts of these in my mouth, there was nothing to be got from them. After sunset, I struggled on along the road towards Putney, where I think the heat ray must have been used for some reason. And in the garden beyond Roehampton, I got a quantity of immature potatoes, sufficient to stay my hunger. From this garden one looked down upon Putney and the river. The aspect of the place in the dusk was singularly desolate. Blackened trees, blackened, desolate ruins. And down the hill, the sheets of the flooded river, red tinged with the weed. And over all, silence. It filled me with indescribable terror to think how swiftly that desolating change had come. For a time, I believed that mankind had been swept out of existence, and that I stood there alone, the last man left alive. Hard by the top of Putney Hill, I came upon another skeleton, with the arms dislocated and removed several yards from the rest of the body. As I proceeded, I became more and more convinced that the extermination of mankind was, save for such stragglers as myself, already accomplished in this part of the world. The Martians, I thought, had gone on and left the country desolated, seeking food elsewhere. Perhaps even now they were destroying Berlin or Paris, or it might be they'd gone northward. Alright, that brings us to the end of chapter 6, The Work of 15 Days. So this has a very distinct feel of, like, I mean, it's a very post-apocalyptic feel right now, where there's absolutely nothing. What is the man, I can't even think of the word now. The Russian nuclear site that is abandoned. I, for the life of me, cannot remember the name. It's on my tongue. I was thinking of it as I was reading that, and how much it reminded me of it. Now the name of it, Chernobyl. Yes, that's right. Don't you hate when you do that? You know exactly what you're talking about. You had the name in your mind not 5 minutes before, but as soon as it comes time to articulate it, poof, gone. I'm getting old. But yeah, it has a very Chernobyl feel to it, where everything seems almost right, but so very wrong. Like, just randomly abandoned. Society. I think I forget where Chernobyl is. Is it, it was Soviet, but where does it actually, is it in Ukraine, or is it right around the border? I forget where they are. But yeah, it's that sort of feel that I'm imagining here, where if you're wandering around it, it all just seems almost as if something just stepped out. All of a sudden the people are gone. But also a pervading sense of just wrongness. So, okay, yeah, it's Ukraine. So, Slava Ukraine. All right. Our next chapter is a fair bit longer. We're getting back into the heftier chapters that we've seen in more of that we saw more in book 1. So let's go ahead and take this opportunity. We'll take our break a little bit early, and then when we come back, we'll jump into a meatier chapter, and we'll see where that leaves us after that and how much of the book we have left. I'm aiming to finish up tonight with about 15% to go or so that we'll have the pacing right for Tuesday. So, go ahead and take a few minutes, hit the head, top up your drinks, stretch your legs, and then we'll be in for the rest of the evening as soon as we return. Be back in just a bit. All right, I am back. Got another finger of scotch to get us by, and we'll see if that runs dry by the end. I'll have to crack something a little bit softer. So, welcome back, and let's continue with where we left off with Chapter 7 of Book 2 of The War of the Worlds, The Man on Putney Hill. I spent that night in the inn that stands at the top of Putney Hill, sleeping in a made bed for the first time since my flight to Leatherhead. I will not tell the needless trouble I had in breaking into that house. Afterwards, I found the front door was on the latch, nor how I ransacked every room for food until just on the verge of despair. In what seemed to be a servant's bedroom, I found a rat-gnawed crust and 2 tins of pineapple. The place had been already searched and emptied. In the bar, I afterwards found some biscuits and sandwiches that had been overlooked. The latter I could not eat, they were too rotten, but the former not only stayed my hunger, but filled my pockets. I lit no lamps, fearing some Martian might come beating that part of London for food in the night. Before I went to bed, I had an interval of restlessness, and prowled from window to window, peering out for some sign of these monsters. I slept little. As I lay in bed, I found myself thinking consecutively, a thing I do not remember to have done since my last argument with the curate. During all of the intervening time, my mental condition had been a hurrying succession of vague emotional states, or a sort of stupid receptivity. But in the night, my brain, reinforced, I suppose, by the food I had eaten, grew clear again, and I thought. 3 things struggled for possession of my mind: the killing of the curate, the whereabouts of the Martians, and the possible fate of my wife. The former gave me no sensation of horror or remorse to recall. I saw it simply as a thing done, a memory infinitely disagreeable but without the quality of remorse. I saw myself then as I see myself now, driven step by step towards that hasty blow, the creature of a sequence of accidents leading inevitably to that. I felt no condemnation, yet the memory, static, unprogressive, haunted me. In the silence of the night, with that sense of the nearness of God that sometimes comes into the stillness and the darkness, I stood my trial, my only trial, for that moment of wrath and fear. I retraced every step of our conversation, from the moment when I had found him crouching beside me, heedless of my thirst, and pointing to the fire and smoke that streamed up from the ruins of Weybridge. We had been incapable of cooperation. Grim chance had taken no heed of that. Had I foreseen, I should have left him at Halliford. But I did not foresee, and crime is to foresee and do. And I set this down, as I have set all this story down, as it was. There were no witnesses. All these things I might have concealed, but I set it down, and the reader must form his judgment as he will. And when, by an effort, I had set aside that picture of a prostrate body, I faced the problem of the Martians and the fate of my wife. For the former, I had no data. I could imagine 100 things, and so, unhappily, I could for the latter. And suddenly that night became terrible. I found myself sitting up in bed, staring at the dark. I found myself praying that the heat ray might have suddenly and painlessly struck her out of being. Since the night of my return from Leatherhead, I had not prayed. I had uttered prayers, fetish prayers, had prayed as heathens mutter charms when I was in extremity. But now I prayed indeed, pleading steadfastly and sanely, face to face with the darkness of God. Strange night. Strangest in this, that so soon as dawn had come, I, who had talked with God, crept out of the house like a rat leaving its hiding place. A creature scarcely larger, an inferior animal, a thing that for any passing whim of our masters might be hunted and killed. Perhaps they also prayed confidently to God. Surely, if we have learned nothing else, this war has taught us pity. Pity for those witless souls that suffer our dominion. The morning was bright and fine, and the eastern sky glowed pink, and was fretted with little golden clouds. In the road that runs from the top of Putney Hill to Wimbledon was a number of poor vestiges of the panic torrent that must have poured Londonward on the Sunday night after the fighting began. There was a little two-wheeled cart, inscribed with the name Thomas Lobb, greengrocer, New Malden, with a smashed wheel and an abandoned tin trunk. There was a straw hat trampled into the now hardened mud, and at the top of West Hill a lot of blood-stained glass about the overturned water trough. My movements were languid, my plans of the vaguest. I had an idea of going to Leatherhead, though I knew that there I had the poorest chance of finding my wife. Certainly, unless death had overtaken them suddenly, my cousins and she would have fled thence. But it seemed to me I might find or learn there whither the Surrey people had fled. I knew I wanted to find my wife, that my heart ached for her and the world of men, but I had no clear idea how the finding might be done. I was also sharply aware now of my intense loneliness. From the corner I went, under cover of a thicket of trees and bushes, to the edge of Wimbledon Common, stretching wide and far. That dark expanse was lit, in patches, by yellow gorse and broom. There was no red weed to be seen, and as I prowled, hesitating, on the verge of the open, the sun rose, flooding it all with light and vitality. I came upon a busy swarm of little frogs in a swampy place among the trees. I stopped to look at them, drawing a lesson from their stout resolve to live, and presently, turning suddenly, with an odd feeling of being watched, I beheld something crouching amid a clump of bushes. I stood regarding this. I made a step towards it, and it rose up and became a man armed with a cutlass. I approached him slowly. He stood silent and motionless, regarding me. As I drew nearer, I perceived he was dressed in clothes as dusty and filthy as my own. He looked, indeed, as though he had been dragged through a culvert. Nearer, I distinguished the green slime of ditches mixing with the pale drab of dried clay and shiny coaly patches. His black hair fell over his eyes, and his face was dark and dirty, sunken, so that at first I did not recognize him. There was a red cut across the lower part of his face. "Stop!" he cried, when I was within 10 yards of him, and I stopped. His voice was hoarse. "Where do you come from?" he said. I thought, surveying him. "I come from Mortlake," I said. "I was buried near the pit the Martians made out about their cylinder. I have worked my way out and escaped." "There's no food about here," he said. "This is my country. All this hill down to the river, and back to Clapham, and up to the edge of the common. There's only food for one. Which way are you going?" I answered slowly. "I don't know," I said. "I have been buried in the ruins of a house 13 or 14 days. I don't know what has happened." He looked at me doubtfully, then started, and looked with a changed expression. "I've no wish to stop about here," said I. "I think I shall go to Leatherhead, for my wife was there." He shot out a pointing finger. "It is you," said he, "the man from Woking. You weren't killed at Weybridge." I recognized him at the same moment. "You are the artilleryman who came into my garden." "Good luck," he said. "We are lucky ones. Fancy you." He put out a hand, and I took it. "I crawled up a drain," he said, "but they didn't kill everyone. And after they went away, I got off towards Walton, across the fields, but it's not 16 days altogether. Your hair is grey." He looked over his shoulder suddenly. "Will Near Rook he said. One gets to know that birds have shadows these days. This is a bit open. Let us crawl under those bushes and talk. Have you seen Martians? I said. Since I crawled out, they've gone away across London, he said. I guess they've got a bigger camp there. Of a night, all over there, Hampstead way, the sky is alive with their lights. It's like a great city, and in the glare you can just see them moving. By daylight you can't, but nearer, I haven't seen them. He counted on his fingers. 5 days. Then I saw a couple across Hammersmith way carrying something big, and the night before last, he stopped and spoke impressively. It was just a matter of lights, but it was something up in the air. I believe they built a flying machine and are learning to fly. I stopped on hands and knees, for we had come to the bushes. Fly? Yes, he said. Fly. I went on into a little bower and sat down. It's all over with humanity, I said. If they can do that, they will simply go round the world. He nodded. They will, but it will relieve things over here a bit. And besides, he looked at me, aren't you satisfied it is up with humanity? I am. We're down. We're beat. I stared. Strange as it may seem, I had not arrived at this fact. A fact perfectly obvious so soon as he spoke. I had still held a vague hope. Rather, I had kept a lifelong habit of mind. He repeated his words. We're beat. They carried absolute conviction. It's all over, he said. They've lost one. Just one. They've made their footing good and crippled the greatest power in the world. They've walked over us. The death of that one at Weybridge was an accident. And these are only pioneers. They kept on coming, these green stars. I've seen none these 5 or 6 days, but I've no doubt they're falling somewhere every night. Nothing's to be done. We're under. We're beat. I made him no answer. I sat staring before me, trying in vain to devise some countervailing thought. This isn't a war, said the artilleryman. It was never a war, any more than there's war between man and ants. Suddenly I recalled the night in the observatory. After the 10th shot, they fired no more. At least, until the first cylinder came. How do you know? Said the artilleryman. I explained. He thought, something wrong with the gun, he said. What if there is? They'll just get it right again. Even if there's a delay, how can it alter the end? It's just men and ants. There's ants build their cities, live their lives, have wars, revolutions, until the men want them out of the way. Then they go out of the way. That's what we are now. Just ants. Only. Yes, I said. We're eatable ants. We sat looking at each other. And what will they do with us? I said. That's what I've been thinking, he said. That's what I've been thinking. After Weybridge, I went south, thinking. I saw what was up. Most of the people were hard at it, squealing and exciting themselves, but I'm not so fond of squealing. I've been in sight of death once or twice. I'm not an ornamental soldier. And at the best and worst, death, it's just death. And it's the man that keeps on thinking comes through. I saw everyone tracking away south. Says I, food won't last this way. And I turned right back. I went for the Martians like a sparrow goes for a man, all round. He waved a hand at the horizon. They're starving in heaps, bolting, treading on each other. He saw my face and halted awkwardly. No doubt, lots who had money have gone away to France, he said. Oh, hang on. Having another YouTube time. Just a moment. Luckily, it kicked in at the start of a paragraph, so it's easy to pick back up where we were. But, let's see if we can ride this one out. One more reason that it is to the good that we delay our, that we intend to split this up into Tuesday. Come on. Yeah, watching the bit rate drop and drop and drop. Come on, you can do better than that. You OBS. Oh, we're climbing. We're climbing. We might be okay. Maybe. Still dropping frames. Oh, maybe. Are we stable? I think we're stable. Alright, I think we are back. Let me just make sure my monitor keeps up. For real. Every time it does this, I always double check my local connection to be like, alright, I'm still getting down just fine. The up is, you know, the best you can get with copper wire. Sadly, there's no fiber out this way. But, I mean, I'm still getting like 5 meg up, which should be more than sufficient for this. But it do be what it do. Alright, I think we're back in stable. So, let's continue where we were. No doubt, lots who had money have gone away to France, he said. He seemed to hesitate whether to apologize. Met my eyes and went out. There's food all about here. Canned things in shops, wines, spirits, mineral waters, and the water mains and drains are empty. Well, I was telling you what I was thinking. Here's intelligent things, I said. And it seems they want us for food. First they'll smash us up. Ships, machines, guns, cities, all the order and organization. All that will go. If we were the size of ants, we might pull through, but we're not. It's all too bulky to stop. That's the first certainty, eh? I assented. It is. I've thought it out. Very well, then. Next, at present, we're caught as we're wanted. A Martian has only to go a few miles to get a crowd on the run, and I saw one day out by Wandsworth, picking out houses to pieces and routing among the wreckage. But they won't keep on doing that. So soon as they've settled all our guns and ships and smashed our railways and done all the things they're doing over there, they'll begin catching us systematic, picking the best and storing us in cages and things. That's what they'll start doing in a bit. Lord! They haven't begun on us yet. Don't you see that? Not begun, I exclaimed. Not begun. All that's happened so far is through our not having the sense to keep quiet, worrying them with guns and such foolery, and losing our heads and rushing off in crowds to where there wasn't any more safety than where we were. They don't want to bother us yet. They're making their things, making all the things they couldn't bring with them, getting things ready for the rest of their people. Very likely, that's why the cylinders have stopped for a bit, for fear of hitting those who are here. And instead of rushing about blind on the howl or getting dynamite on the chance of busting them up, we've got to fix ourselves up according to the new state of affairs. That's how I figure it out. It isn't quite according to what a man wants for his species. It's about what the facts point to. And that's what the principle I acted upon. Cities, nations, civilization, progress. It's all over. That game's up. We're beat. But if that is so, what is there to live for? The artilleryman looked at me for a moment. Won't be any more blessed concerts for 1,000,000 years or so. There won't be any Royal Academy of Arts. No nice little feeds at restaurants. If it's amusement you're after, I reckon the game is up. If you've got any drawing room manners or a dislike to eating peas with a knife or dropping H's, you'd better chuck 'em. Chuck 'em away. There ain't no further use. I mean that men like me are going on living for the sake of the breed. I tell you, I'm grim set on living. And if I'm not mistaken, you'll show what insides you've got, too. Before long. We aren't going to be exterminated, and I don't mean to be caught either. Tamed and fattened and bred like a thundering ox. Ah! Fancy those brown creepers. That was a bad choice of voice for the military man. You don't mean to say I do. I'm going on, onto their feet. Got it planned. I've thought it out. We men are beat. We don't know enough. Got to learn before we've got a chance. We've got to live and keep independent while we learn. See? That's what has to be done. I stared, astonished, and stirred profoundly by the man's resolution. Great God, cried I, but you are a man indeed. Suddenly I gripped his hand. He said, with his eyes shining. I've thought it out, eh? Go on, I said. Christ, this is a lot. Well, those who mean to escape their couching must get ready. I'm getting ready. Mind you, it isn't all of us that are made for wild beasts. And that's what it's got to be. That's why I watched you. I had my doubts. You're slender. I didn't know that it was you see. Or just how you'd been buried. All these, the sort of people that lived in these houses, and all those damn little clerks that used to live down that way, they'd be no good. They haven't any spirit in them. No proud dreams and no proud lusts, and a man who hasn't one or the other. Lord! What is he but funk and precautions? They just used to skedaddle off to work. I've seen hundreds of them. Bit of breakfast in hand, running wild and shining to catch that little season ticket train, for fear they'd get dismissed if they didn't. Working at businesses they were afraid to take the trouble to understand, skedaddling back for fear they wouldn't be in time for dinner. Keeping indoors after dinner for fear of the back streets, and sleeping with the wives they married, not because they wanted them, but because they had a bit of money that would make for safety in their one little miserable skedaddle through the world. Lives insured and a bit invested for fear of accidents. And on Sundays, fear of the hereafter. As if hell was built for rabbits. Well, the Martians will just be a godsend to these. Nice roomy cages, fattening food, careful breeding, no worry. After a week or so chasing about the fields and the lands on empty stomachs, they'll come and be caught cheerful. They'll be quite glad after a bit. They'll wonder what people did before there were Martians to take care of them, and the bar loafers and mashers and singers. I can't imagine them. I can imagine them, he said with a sort of somber gratification. There'll be any amount of sentiment and religion loose among them. There's hundreds of things I saw with my eyes that I've only begun to see clearly these last few days. There's lots who'll take things as they are, fat and stupid. And lots will be worried by a sort of feeling that it's all wrong, and they ought to be doing something. Now, whenever things are so that a lot of people feel they ought to be doing something, the weak, and those who go weak with a lot of complicated thinking, always make for a sort of do-nothing religion, very pious and superior, and submit to persecution and the will of the Lord. Very likely you've seen the same thing. It's energy in a gale of funk. It's turned clean inside out. These cages will be full of psalms and hymns and piety, and those of a less simple sort will work in a bit of... what is it? Eroticism. He paused. So will I here. That was a lot of that voice, and wow, okay, that all hits a little home, considering the state of the world we're in. Christ almighty. Yeah, full-on manifesto there. It's, woo-hoo. That was all one paragraph, even. Not broken up, not anything, just shotgun through the entire page, a solid wall of text. And thank you, YouTube, for letting me get through that before you start this up again. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Hang tight. Okay, I think... are we stable? I believe we might be stable. Alright. Yeah, as always, thank you very much, YouTube, for letting me get through the great Grenadier's manifesto and his little soapbox moment before stopping. Yep, I think we're alright. I'll take the monitor back over to live, and looks like, yep, we're only a second or two off. Very good, very good. Alright. He paused. Very likely these Martians will make pets of some of them, train them to do tricks. Who knows? Get sentimental over the pet boy who grew up and had to be killed, and some, maybe, they will train to hunt us. No, I cried. That's impossible. No human being. What's the good of going on with such lies? Said the artilleryman. There's men who do it cheerful. What nonsense to pretend there isn't. And I succumbed to his conviction. If they come after me, he said. Lord, if they come after me. And subsided into a grim meditation. I sat contemplating these things. I could find nothing to bring against this man's reasoning. In the days before the invasion, no one would have questioned my intellectual superiority to his. I, a professed and recognized writer on philosophical themes, and he, a common soldier. And yet, he had already formulated a situation he'd scarcely realized. What are you doing? I said presently. What plans have you made? He hesitated. Well, it's like this, he said. What have we to do? We have to invent a sort of life where men can live and breed and be sufficiently secure to bring the children up. Yes, wait a bit, and I'll make it clear that what I think ought to be done. The tame ones will go like all tame beasts. In a few generations, they'll be big, beautiful, rich-blooded, stupid rubbish. The risk is that we have to keep wild. We'll go savage, degenerate into a sort of big savage rat. You see, how I mean to live is underground. I've been thinking about the drains. Of course, those who don't know drains think horrible things. But under this London are miles and miles, hundreds of miles. And a few days' rain and London empty will leave them sweet and clean. Main drains are big enough and airy enough for anyone. And then the cellars, vaults, stores, from which vaulting passages may be made to the drains. And the railway tunnels and subways, eh? You begin to see? We form a band. Able-bodied, clean-minded men. We're not going to pick up any rubbish that drips in. Weaklings go out again. As you meant me to go. Well, apparently, didn't I? We won't quarrel about that. Go on. Those who stop obey orders. Able-bodied, clean-minded women we want also. Mothers and teachers. No lackadaisical ladies. No blasted rolling eyes. Can't have any weak or silly. Life is real again. And the useless and cumbersome and mischievous have to die. They ought to die. They ought to be willing to die. Sort of disloyalty, after all, to live and taint the race. Oh, Christ. And they can't be happy. Moreover, dying is none too dreadful. It's the funking makes it bad. And in all those places we shall gather. Our district will be London. We may even be able to keep a watch and run about in the open when the Martians keep away. Play cricket, perhaps. That's how we shall save the race, eh? It's a possible thing. But saving the race is nothing in itself. As I say, that's only being rats. It's saving our knowledge and adding to it is the thing. There, men like you come in. There's books, there's models. We must make great safe places down deep. Get all the books we can. Not novels and poetry swipes, but ideas, science books. That's where men like you come in. We must go to the British Museum and pick all those books through. Especially, we must keep our science. Learn more. We must watch these Martians. Some of us must go as spies. When it's all working, perhaps I will. Get caught, I mean. And the great thing is, we must leave the Martians alone. We mustn't even steal. If we get in their way, we clear out. We must show them we mean no harm. Yes, I know. But they're intelligent beings. And they won't hunt us down if they have all they want, and think we're just harmless vermin. Okay, need a drink. I want to believe that when he's thinking of the race and all that, he's just thinking of humanity as a whole. Just the maintenance of Homo sapiens. That is fine. That is nothing wrong with that. But there are some heavy connotations here. There is a whole mountain of incredulity that needs to be layered on this. Because it sounds a whole lot like the certain sorts that go marching through the streets on days that are trying to provoke attention. I don't think that's what Wells was trying to get at, but it sounds a lot like it. Also remember, this is before a lot of that hyper-nationalism really caught on. This is, and it's also consider that this is London. Remember when we were reading Sherlock Holmes and the KKK was brought up, and they were thought of as the like a mystical secret society almost, less of the rednecks in Casper outfits and more of the American Illuminati. Yeah, he might be saying it without saying it. So I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, but he might not deserve it. I don't know. But also consider that I think the artilleryman is supposed to be almost a mouthpiece for the antithesis of what he's thinking. The artilleryman is the embodiment of the baser natures of what humans are capable of, whereas the narrator is the idealized, like, okay, survive and think and maintain cerebral sort of position. We'll see how much these overlap as we continue on. The artilleryman paused and laid a brown hand upon my arm. After all, there may not be so much we may have to learn before. Just imagine this. 4 or 5 of their fighting machines suddenly starting off. Heat rays right and left, now a Martian in them. Not a Martian in them, but men. Men who've learned the way how. It may be in my time even. Those men, fancy having one of them lovely things, with its heat ray wide and free. Fancy having it in control. What matter if you smash to smithereens the end of the run after a bust like that? I reckon the Martians will open their beautiful eyes. Can't you see them? Can't you see them hurrying, puffing and blowing and hooting to their other mechanical affairs? Something out of gear in every case, and swish, bang, rattle, swish! Just as they are fumbling over, swish, comes the heat ray, and behold, man has come back to his own. For a while, the imaginative daring of the artilleryman, and the tone of assurance and courage he assumed, completely dominated my mind. I believed unhesitatingly, both in his forecast of human destiny, and in the practicability of his astonishing scheme, and the reader who thinks me susceptible and foolish must contrast his position. Reading steadily with all his thoughts about his subject and mine, crouching fearfully in the bushes and listening, distracted by apprehension. We talked in this manner through the early morning time, and later crept out of the bushes, and, after scanning the sky for Martians, hurried precipitately to the house on Putney Hill, where he had made his lair. It was the coal cellar of the place, and when I saw the work he had spent a week upon, it was a burrow scarcely 10 yards long, which he designed to reach the main drain on Putney Hill. I had my first inkling of the gulf between his dreams and his powers. Such a hole I could have dug in a day, but I believed in him sufficiently to work with him all that morning until past midday at his digging. We had a garden barrow, and shot the earth we removed against the kitchen range. We refreshed ourselves with a tin of mock turtle soup and wine from a neighboring pantry. I found a curious relief from the aching strangeness of the world in this steady labor. As we worked, I turned his project over in my mind, and presently objections and doubts began to arise. But I worked there all the morning. So glad was I to find myself with a purpose again. After working an hour, I began to speculate on the distance one had to go before the cloaca was reached. Wait, what? The chances we had of missing it altogether. My immediate trouble was why we should dig this long tunnel, when it was possible to get into the drain at once down one of the manholes and work back to the house. It seemed to me, too, that the house was inconveniently chosen and required a needless length of tunnel. And just as I was beginning to face these things, the artilleryman stopped digging and looked at me. "We're working well," he said. He put down his spade. "Let's knock off a bit," he said. "I think it's time we reconnoitered from the roof of the house." I was for going on, and after a little hesitation, he resumed his spade. And then, suddenly, I was struck by a thought. I stopped, and so did he at once. "Why were you walking about the common," I said, "instead of being here?" "Taking the air," he said. "I was coming back. It's safer by night." "But the work?" "Oh, one can't always work," he said. And in a flash, I saw the man plain. He hesitated, holding his spade. "We ought to reconnoiter now," he said, "because if any come near, they may hear the spades and drop upon us unawares." I was no longer disposed to object. We went together through the roof and stood on a ladder, peeping out of the roof door. No Martians were to be seen, and we ventured out on the tiles and slipped down under shelter of the parapet. From this position, a shrubbery hid the greater portion of Putney, but we could see the river below, a bubbly mass of red weed, and the low parts of Lambeth flooded and red. The red creeper swarmed up the trees about the old palace, and their branches stretched gaunt and dead, and set with shriveled leaves from amid its clusters. It was strange how entirely dependent both of these things were upon flowing water for their propagation. About us, neither had gained a footing. Laburnums, pink maize, snowballs, and roots of arbor vitae rose out of laurels, and hydrangeas, green and brilliant in the sunlight. Beyond Kensington, dense smoke was rising, and that and a blue haze hid the northward hills. The artilleryman began to tell me of the sort of people who still remained in London. "Night last week," he said, "some fools got the electric light in order. There was all Regent Street and the circus ablaze, crowded with painted and ragged drunkards and men and women dancing and shouting till dawn. Man who's there told me, and as the day came they became aware of a fighting machine standing nearby the Langham and looking down at them. Heaven knows how long he had been there. It must have been some of them a nasty turn. He came down the road towards them and picked up nearly 100, too drunk or frightened to run away." Grotesque gleam of a time no history will ever fully describe. From that, in answer to my questions, he came round to his grandiose plans again. He grew enthusiastic. He talked so eloquently of the possibility of capturing a fighting machine that I more than half believed in him again. But now that I was beginning to understand something of his quality, could divine the stress he laid on doing nothing precipitately, and noted that now there was no question that he personally was to capture and fight the great machine. After a time, we went down to the cellar. Neither of us seemed disposed to resume digging, and when he suggested a meal, I was nothing loath. He became suddenly very generous, and when we had eaten, he went away and returned with some excellent cigars. We lit these, and his optimism glowed. He was inclined to regard my coming as a great occasion. "There's some champagne in the cellar," he said. "We can dig better on this Thames-side Burgundy," said I. "No," said he, "I am host today. Champagne! Great God! We've a heavy enough task before us. Let us take a rest and gather strength while we may. Look at these blistered hands." And pursuant to this idea of a holiday, he insisted upon playing cards after we'd eaten. He taught me euchre. I can't really play euchre with two people. I guess you can, but it's not nearly as good as four-man. And after dividing London between us, I taking the northern side and he the southern, we played for parish points. Grotesque and foolish as this will seem to the sober reader, it is absolutely true. And what is more remarkable, I found the card game and several others we played extremely interesting. Strange mind of man, that with our species upon the edge of extermination or appalling degradation, with no clear prospect before us but the chance of a horrible death, we could sit, following the chance of this painted pasteboard, and playing the joker with vivid delight. Afterwards he taught me poker, and I beat him at 3 tough chess games. When dark came, we decided to take the risk and lit a lamp. After an interminable string of games, we supped, and the artilleryman finished the champagne. We went on smoking the cigars. He was no longer the energetic regenerator of his species I had encountered in the morning. He was still optimistic, but it was a less kinetic, a more thoughtful optimism. I remember he wound up with my health, proposed in a speech of small variety and considerable intermittence. I took a cigar and went upstairs to look at the lights of which he had spoken that blazed so greenly along the Highgate hills. At first, I stared unintelligently across the London Valley. The northern hills were shrouded in darkness. The fires near Kensington glowed redly, and now and then an orange-red tongue of flame flashed up and vanished in the deep blue night. All the rest of London was black. Then, nearer, I perceived a strange light, a pale, violet-purple, fluorescent glow, quivering under the night breeze. For a space I could not understand it, and then I knew that it must be the red weed from which this faint irradiation proceeded. With that realization, my dormant sense of wonder, my sense of the proportion of things, awoke again. I glanced from that to Mars, red and clear, glowing high in the west, and then gazed long and earnestly at the darkness of Hampstead and Highgate. I remained a very long time upon the roof, wondering at the grotesque changes of the day. I recalled my mental states, from the midnight prayer to the foolish card playing. I had a violent revulsion of feeling. I remember, I flung away the cigar with a certain wasteful symbolism. My folly came to me with glaring exaggeration. I seemed a traitor to my wife and to my kind. I was filled with remorse. I resolved to leave this strange, undisciplined dreamer of great things to his drink and gluttony, and to go on into London. There, it seemed to me, I had the best chance of learning what the Martians and my fellowmen were doing. I was still upon the roof when the late moon rose. Alright, that brings us to the end of Chapter 7 of Book 2, where we were reunited with the artilleryman that we saw right at toward the beginning of the book when the first clash with the Martians was underway. And, did he have ideas? But also, of the same sort that have those sort of ideas, it seems he may not have the gumption to follow through with them. There's a type, I'm sure you're aware, that will espouse grand plans and manifestos, and when it comes time to put their elbow grease into it, that's not quite where the fun part lies. You'll end up with that's the sort of thing you see with Meal Team 6. But I'll try and give him the yeah, we call it social media. I'll try and give him the benefit of the doubt for now. Well, give Wells the benefit of the doubt, not necessarily the artilleryman, because he's a sort. But that's the sort of thing that has been around forever, ever and ever and ever. There's the not necessarily idle thinkers, but because I wouldn't call him a great thinker in any sort, but you get a sort of an idea in your head and expand on it a little bit, and then that's as far as it goes. That's as far as it needs to go. In a time of extreme crisis like this, maybe that's a coping mechanism to get through day to day. So I won't give him too much guff on that front. Because, I mean, when the world's going to shit, sometimes you just need to have some sort of idea to keep one foot in front of the other. And yeah, you're right. I think Wells is using him as a mouthpiece to get this sort of or this sort of thought out, and then to also use them as a bit of a straw man to point out as not an ideal sort. That is the pitfall of this sort of fiction and soapboxery. It tends to come with a lot of straw men attached. You see the same thing if you're reading Rand, God forbid, where you have something to point to as someone to be the mouthpiece of the bad ideas that you're fighting against. Would you believe I actually saw Rand on Gutenberg and had a thought that maybe we'd read it, but I definitely had the better thought to ignore that one. I try and come from a place of intellectual neutrality, but that's too much for me. I can't read Rand from a place of non-judgment. Yeah. Can't do it. Can't do it. That's. I don't have very many hard lines in the sand, but that is one of them. Alright, so we are at about 12.5% left in the book. Yeah, exactly. I can try and make fun of what I read. I can try and not take things seriously. I can try and take the piss, like you're saying. But man, I don't know. That'd be like reading The Art of the Deal. I just couldn't do it. Alright, so we've got about 12.5% or so before left in the book, which is just about on point for what we should be able to get through on Tuesday. So we'll have a bit of an early night tonight. We'll sit around and talk and yap for a little bit longer and kind of digest what we've seen so far. But this will be all the reading we're doing for now. And then on Tuesday, we'll have a short reading session, but we'll finish up the book with plenty of time on either end and take our pace, take our time, take it nice and slowly, and enjoy it as it comes in. So yeah, so far I am greatly enjoying this. As I think the last time I'd actually tried to read any of the War of the Worlds, I was in 3rd or 4th grade, and I think I'd mentioned it was the teacher had their own little classroom library, and you'd read a couple paragraphs at a time before the time was up. It was probably a little over my head at the time. Honestly, for that age, it probably shouldn't have been in the teacher's little library, if I'm being entirely honest here. This is... For a teenager, this is probably fine. For a 10-year-old, maybe not. Maybe not. I for sure would not have gotten any of the satire. And yeah, the adaptations were chief in my mind, and the conception, and the old radio show. Actually, that brings up the idea, when I was looking at War of the Worlds, how cool would it be if we found some of the scripts of the old radio shows and did those on here? That sounds like it would be a whole lot of fun. Like, there were so many good ones. Do, like, old Superman radio shows, do, Smokey, like all sorts of the classics. Maybe that's something we'll throw in every once in a while. I wonder where I can find those. That just sounds fun. And apply a filter on the mic to sound a little crackly. That could be cool. Maybe a once a week thing. Maybe we'll do that as a Sunday special or something. Or yeah, that could work. Or maybe throw in a day or something. Just do it for like a half hour or so. Just a quick little bit. Yeah, we'll have to throw that let that one noodle around for a little bit. See if we can drum up some interest. Yeah, the old noirs, man, because I was thinking the this format is basically that. It's just, I mean, we're reading a book versus playing out, and then the house, the Archblade guy was in yesterday and asked if it sounded like, or if I intended to sound like the old broadcast, and I'm like, you know what? That just kind of brings that back into mind. Maybe I'll have to look around and see if I can find those old scripts. That could be a lot of fun. Not to say that we're getting away from our core of what we do here. We're all about reading and fun things like that. But the old radio drama, there were a lot of really good ones. And, I mean, that's a whole period of history that, I mean, people are forgetting about, or some have been adapted, some haven't been. So, options to explore, places to expand upon, and see if we can draw in some extra buzz. That's an idea. I like that idea a lot, actually. Well, alright, so we are coming up to the end of War of the Worlds, and we are coming up on the end of August. So, what should we read next? Lordy, lordy, lordy. I've got big plans for October, and so late in September we'll probably start those a little early, because in all likelihood we'll have October booked, because there's so many great old horrors and things like that. But what should we read next to get us to that point? We've hit a lot of the high points already. When we read Dumas, when we read Mark Twain, maybe it's time to pull out Faulkner. I know I saw The Sound and the Fury is out there. That could be good. Maybe it'll be time to revisit some things that we've read the first installment of. Although, do we want to do Holmes early, or do we want to go back, save that for October or something? Yeah, if you can find anything that's autumn appropriate, that'd be wonderful. It's hard to find a real seasonal book, but there definitely are some that just feel right for a specific season, you know? So, let that noodle around in your idea. Since we'll be finishing this on Tuesday, we'll have a few days to go, and I'll be looking on my own. But if there's anything that you'd like to hear, I am more than happy and open to suggestions. Because a lot of my choices are things that I've either read before or remember fondly, or the sort of thing. But it's nice to branch out and get myself to read something that I wouldn't have otherwise. That's a lot like the second book we read, the Mysterious Island. I never would have chosen that if Z hadn't asked for it. And I liked that one quite a lot. Aside from the very awkward implications of the orangutan. But try not to think too hard on that. All right. So, with that, let's go ahead and take it a little bit of an early evening. We'll call it just about 10 minutes early and just let it all soak in for a little bit. We'll be back on Tuesday for the thrilling, anticlimactic, climactic? I'm not sure yet. We'll find out. For the conclusion of the War of the Worlds. There's not a lot left. If I'm looking at it now, let's see, we've got, there's only 2 chapters and an epilogue. So we are very much into the conclusion. It could be both thrilling and anticlimactic all at once. Let's, again, I pray, suspend disbelief for just a moment. Forget the adaptations, forget the cultural osmosis and awareness of the source, and let's take it in as it comes. I'll try my very best to forget. That's what the Scotch does. Alright, and so with that, we'll call this an evening. Thank you very much for joining us, as always. And if you have not yet, I encourage you very much to drop a like on the stream, maybe subscribe to the channel, and we'll see everyone next time on Tuesday, when we will finish this book and start thinking about what comes next. Until then, have a wonderful evening. Thank you very much for joining us, and good night.